Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, here we go again. I think it's the fourth attempt now by the government to get a general election. That's after last night's defeat under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. This is a simple bill. It requires a simple majority in the House of Commons. And earlier on this morning, Jeremy Corbyn said no deal is now off the table. So tonight, Labour will back a general election. And what he means by that, of course, is that the European Union have accepted the extension of our membership until the 31st of January or earlier, if some sort of deal was done. So it's looking, despite a couple of attempts to put a spanner in the works, amendments were put down suggesting that the vote was extended to 16 and 17-year-olds. A further amendment was put down suggesting that 2.4 million EU citizens living in the UK could vote in a general election. They've been ruled inadmissible, and we move into a vote pretty shortly. Joining me is LBC's political editor Theo Usherwood. Theo, quick question for you.
Yes.
It would appear, because we're so used to John Bercow being in the chair.
Yes.
But right at the moment, it's Lindsay Hoyle in the chair, who people know less about. Why is Bercow not there?
It's a procedural thing. Good evening, Nigel. Because Lindsay Hoyle is the Deputy Speaker. It's a committee of the whole House, which means that, as such, the Chairs of Ways and Means, which is Lindsay Hoyle, presides over proceedings in the House of Commons. So when it gets back to third reading, John Bercow, the Speaker, will resume his seat as Speaker. Don't read anything into it in terms of the decision not to select amendments on EU citizens being given the right to vote or 16 and 17-year-olds being given the right to vote. There is some confusion tonight on this, and you heard me speaking to Eddie a few moments ago about whether the decision to rule those two changes from Labour, as you put it, inadmissible, out of order, whether they could actually return in the House of Lords, because, of course, the Speaker in the House of Lords does not select amendments, and therefore, when it comes to the votes tomorrow in the House of Lords and the passage of this bill through the upper chamber, that those changes are made and then they would be voted on by MPs in the House of Commons in what's known as parliamentary ping-pong, when the Lords make changes and then the House of Commons have to change them back. Now, if those two changes make it onto the bill, and then MPs actually vote to uphold those changes, the government has said that they will pull the legislation because, of course, EU citizens' rights would be a massive boost for the Liberal Democrats, while 16 and 17-year-olds, Jeremy Corbyn, are hoping they're all massive fans of him and would vote for Labour in a general election. But right now in the House of Commons, they're having a fight about the day of the election, whether it should be December the 9th, the Monday, or whether it should be Thursday, December the 12th. The government wanted to be December the 12th, obviously, because it's more likely that students would have gone home from university.
Well, also it's a Thursday, isn't it?
It's a Thursday, usual day for an election.
Yeah.
And but they think it's more likely that students, the calculation is that students will play less of a role in votes taking place in constituencies like, I've mentioned them before, Sheffield, Canterbury, Cambridge, Oxford even, where there are Conservative voters, but every election during term time, they get cancelled out by large student populations. So that's the fight at the moment. Liberal Democrats and Labour trying to do their utmost to give themselves the maximum possible chance to do well with the student vote. When it comes to polling day, they fancy their chances much better if it's on the Monday, December the 9th, rather than the Thursday.
But all things being equal, we're pretty much odds on, I think, aren't we, to get a majority for a general election tonight?
Yes, we will, in the House of Commons.
Yes,
but then it
in
goes
the Commons.
to the House of Lords. And it's still going to go through the House of Lords. And therefore, Nigel, it becomes... as I said, I'm sure we'll get clarity, and if I get any more detail, I'll bring it to you and of course Ian Dale. But tomorrow it has to get through the House of Lords as well. But we should be in a position by the end of the week to know whether there'll definitely be an election. I should add, of course, that when it comes to the date of the election, the Tories, the governments have not, they've not issued the same threat as they've issued when it comes to EU citizens being given the right to vote and 16 to 17-year-olds, where they're threatened to pull the bill, they've taken a more a less hard line approach with the date. There may be a compromise and that's still in the offing, possibly the 11th, which is the Wednesday, or the Tuesday on the 10th.
Right.
But also, I mean, the other interesting thing is, Nigel, is what does Boris Johnson do about the Brexit Party?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And how is he going to come to reach an accommodation with yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear, isn't it, Theo, that the Liberal Democrats will run on. We revoke Article 50 if we form the next government. The Labour Party are going to have a second referendum after a negotiation. Well, we know what the Brexit Party stand for. They want a clean break. And the question is Boris Johnson going to stand saying, vote for me to form a majority government and I will put this new EU treaty, or as he calls it, my deal, through? Is that what Boris is going to stand on? I don't think we quite know the answer to that yet, do we?
Well, he needs to keep mainstream Conservative voters on side. He can't go, and the calculation in number 10 is he can't go. Obviously, there are Labour voters as well. This isn't all about Conservative voters, but he can't go too far down one route in terms of trying to win over people who've been attracted by your party and Labour voters who just want to, who don't think Jeremy Corbyn will deliver Brexit. Of course, the phrase "get Brexit done" isn't just about, and I'm sure you've clocked this, and the Brexit Party have clocked this, isn't just about winning over Leave voters. It's also about winning over very frustrated Remainers who would like some certainty that the Brexit process has been concluded. Now, you know, and Richard Tice knows, that what's coming down the tracks in terms of negotiation with a trade agreement with the European Union.
3 years of it.
3 years of it, possibly. An extended transition period, alignment to EU rules and regulations, tariffs, if we want to have that frictionless trading arrangement with the European Union, that actually we're very far from getting Brexit done. But you hear Remain cabinet ministers, you hear Remain MPs saying they quite like the idea of actually shutting the Pandora's box that our membership of the European Union have created.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great Get Brexit Done. It's a great campaign slogan, if people believe it. But, of course, over the course of a 5 or 6 week campaign, all sorts of things can happen. Theo, what time tonight do we expect results?
We expect results at just after 7:40, 7:45. Okay. There'll be the votes on the amendments, and then it will go to third reading at about 8:15, 8:30.
OK, Theo, thank you very much indeed. That was Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, pointing out that even if this does pass tonight in the House of Commons, which looks pretty certain to me, that the House of Lords could mess around with it. Although, you know, I would have thought the unelected upper chamber being seen in any way to frustrate or change the House of Commons voting for a general election would not be a good look. And because there are many of us out there who think the House of Lords is well past its sell-by date. So tell me, it looks like there's an election coming down the tracks. What's the ideal outcome for you? Do you want the 9th of December, as the Lib Dems and others want? If you do, call 0345 6060 973 and tell me why a Thursday is wrong. Perhaps you think, no, it's time actually to back the government. Let's have a general election, see whether this can clear up the mess. Text to 84850. Or do you think a general election is the wrong answer at this moment in time? And if you do, please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC, at LBC, and of course on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. You can watch us and you can comment. Let's go to Aylesbury and speak to James. James, good evening to you.
Good evening, Nigel. Great to talk to you.
Good. So what is the outcome you want in the next couple of hours?
Between the 9th and the 12th, my personal preference is to go for the 12th. First of all, because it's tradition. I can't remember the last time I've had a general election not on a Thursday. It's probably like 50, 60 or something like that years ago.
I certainly can't know.
But also as well, what I'm concerned about is they're trying to paint it, we have to have it on the 9th because all the students are all this sort of stuff. But how I see it is people are very passionate about the subject of Brexit. It's divided families, it's divided the country. If people will really, really genuinely want to vote and they want to have their voices heard, I think they would. Well, what's the point in having it on the 9th? Wouldn't they go down and go to the 12th?
Well,
It's like students are going to be like,
I couldn't agree.
Thursday, I'm not going to do it.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, Ollie in Basingstoke says to me, why can't students just use postal votes or proxy votes? Problem solved. I mean, absolutely right. James, one of the issues that one of the accusations that was made in 2017 is that you had students who were registered at their home addresses with postal votes, but perhaps also voted in the university towns in which they were staying. Now, I don't know the truth of that. There was some evidence of it. There was some boasting online from people that they'd done it. I don't know. But James, listen, we always have elections on a Thursday. There is no good argument for the 9th over the 12th, I would have thought. And do you think, James, do you think a general election can sort the Brexit mess out?
Well, that's another thing I want to say, Nigel, is under the first past the post system, I'm extremely concerned that the answer is no, because the Brexit Party and the Conservative Party, if the vote is split, we could see what happened in the Peterborough by-election repeat all over the country, get a hung parliament or either a Labour majority or whatever, and they will stop Brexit completely. So I urge both the Conservative and the Brexit Party to form an electoral pact. I know it's going to be difficult because of your two different, outcomes, but if we can form that Leave alliance, then it will be much more likely under first past the post we can get the majority, and we will get that majority, and then we can more likely say yes to the answer.
OK, spoken like a passionate leaver, James. No doubt there are others on the other side of the argument who will think differently. Let me know. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:15, and time for the news headlines with Holly Jones.
And only on LBC.
A general election is coming. There is going to be a majority in Parliament for it tonight. I suspect it'll be for the 12th of December, not the 9th of December, which is the date being put forward by the Liberal Democrats. The House of Lords could mess it up tomorrow, but dare they really do that? So I'm assuming that it's coming. And interestingly, already 47 sitting members of Parliament have said that they're not going to stand again, including one, Heidi Allen. Now, she was elected, of course, or re-elected in 17 in the general election for the Conservatives in South Cambridgeshire on a manifesto of leaving the European Union, honouring the referendum result, and no deal being better than a bad deal being part of that manifesto. And she, of course, earlier on this year, defected to Change UK. But not happy with that, she then defected to the Liberal Democrats. So she sat so far this year for 3 different parties in the House of Commons without once ever bothering to speak to her constituents or give them a chance to have a by-election to see whether they supported her behaviour. And she cites the reason for standing down, the nastiness and intimidation that she's endured as a politician. Now, look, I completely understand, Heidi Allen, when you're at home, out shopping, people shouting abuse at you in the streets and all the rest of it isn't much fun. I know, I've had years of it, and I don't encourage any behaviour like that whatsoever. But I do think, Heidi Allen, that if you've been in 3 different political groupings in the space of 1 year without giving your constituents who voted for you on a Conservative manifesto of leave and now you want to remain, don't be surprised that people are upset with you. I'm not condoning it, but I'm making the point. Now, Derek raises a very good point on Twitter. He says, let me get this straight. Labour and the Lib Dems don't trust university students to remember to vote, yet they want to give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds. It's a very, very good point, Derek. What do you want to see happening tonight? Do you want this general election, or do you think it's a mistake? You see, Jacqueline on Facebook does present a counter-argument, which is, she says, a general election should be on policies not related to Brexit. A referendum should come first. Well, Jacqueline, I'm sorry to tell you that this general election will be utterly dominated by Brexit, despite many, many important other things that need to be discussed. Let's go to Aaron, who's a new caller from Walton-on-Thames. Good evening to you.
Hi, Nigel, you all right?
Yeah, I'm well. Welcome to the show. So, do you want to see a general election?
Yes, I do. I want to get rid of what party's standing, because they're obviously not doing anything towards helping the country. They're just looking out for themselves. I personally think that the only way that Brexit is going to get delivered is if the Brexit Party are in this general election and can lead the country forward in leaving the European Union.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of talk, Aaron, and we had this from a previous caller. A lot of people on the Leave side saying there should be a Leave alliance. But there's some breaking news. And this comes from Henry Zeffman from The Times, exclusive. Understand Downing Street has tonight begun restoring the whip to some of the 21 Tories. So I'm going to love you and leave you, Aaron, and go to Theo. Theo Usherwood. This is an extraordinary move, isn't it?
This is an extraordinary move, Nigel, quite right, because, of course, Boris Johnson needs to get as many possible of his MPs to vote for the government to keep the election on Thursday, December the 12th, rather than allowing opposition MPs to move it to December the 9th. You'll remember those 21 Conservatives included Richard Benyon, Nicholas Soames, Sir Nicholas Soames, Ken Clarke, Dominic Grieve, all lost the whip. David Gorkin included in there as well, Philip Hammond, all lost the whip because they voted to take control of the parliamentary agenda and pass the Benn Act, with, of course, the support of Labour and Liberal Democrat and SNP MPs back in September, forcing the Prime Minister to ask for an extension to Article 50 from October the 31st to January the 31st. The government viewed that the first vote at the very beginning of September to take control of the parliamentary agenda as a vote of confidence. Therefore, not just a three-line whip, but a rebellion was punishable by having the whip removed and, of course, telling those 21 MPs that they would not be able to stand as Conservative candidates at the next
now,
general election.
Theo, some of them have joined the Liberal Democrats since then, haven't they?
Philip Lee joined the Liberal Democrats, Sam Guimard joined the Liberal Democrats, but actually the majority are waiting to find out whether their political careers are dust, or have been turned to dust, because, of course, if there is a general election on December the 9th or December the 12th, it doesn't really matter. If they're not Conservative candidates, their careers are over. They're not going to be able to stand.
We've just got the names, Theo. I don't know whether you've seen this, but Nicholas Watt has put out that the names are Alistair Burt, Caroline Noakes, Greg Clark, Nick Soames, Ed Vasey, Margot James, Stephen Hammond, Steve Bryan, Richard Harrington and Richard Benyon. So presumably, if they wanted to, they could all stand again as Conservatives.
Exactly. That's precisely the point, Nigel, that you make. That now those MPs being brought back into the fold, they will now be able to stand again as Conservative MPs. Of course, somebody like Richard Benyon has said that they're not going to stand again, and so there's no point in necessarily restoring the whip to him.
But Boris needs votes tonight. Does this move indicate that Downing Street think this might be quite a tight vote?
It could be a very tight vote, and at the moment it looks as if they could lose that vote. And just to run through those, Alistair Burt is a former Foreign Office minister. These look like the MPs who actually voted against, and I'd need to cross-reference it exactly, but these are the MPs who voted against the Oliver Letwin amendment Saturday before last, which, of course, was changed the Benn Act to say that we could only leave the European Union once the withdrawal agreement implementation bill had passed through the House of Commons, and simply a meaningful vote, which went beyond just simply holding a meaningful vote. So it looks like those former Tory independent, or those Tory independent MPs who showed loyalty in that Saturday vote in the House of Commons by voting with the government, have now got their, well, you can see it as a reward from their point of view, but the point is, for somebody like Ed Vasey, Stephen Hammond down in Wimbledon, Richard Harrington, Watford, Caroline Noakes, former immigration minister, they will now be able to resume campaigning when this election is called as Conservative MPs.
Yeah, and politically, of course, this is Boris Johnson letting the Europhile wing of the party back in.
Yes, absolutely, and of course there is a danger that Boris Johnson is only going to suffer another rebellion if he returns as a Prime Minister of a majority, and then people like Mr. Hammond or Richard Harrington start turning around and saying, well, actually, I think we need a permanent and comprehensive customs union Prime Minister. Or if Boris Johnson wanted to campaign and say that if he can't get his deal through the House of Commons, then he'd be prepared to leave without a deal. Well, I'm not quite sure how somebody like Steve Bryan would react to that. Or, of course, you've heard from people like John Barron whether they would, they'd be very angry. He's, of course, Conservative Member of Parliament down in Basildon and Billericay, member of, affiliated to the ERG. He insists he's not a member of the ERG, but who said that one of the reasons he liked Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement was that we could get to the end of the transition period in December 2020 and leave without a deal. But you know, Nigel, that we need, once we get to July, we need to request an extension.
We have to extend, and I also think, Theo, I also think we're legally committed to transition towards the end of 2022 as well. But that's a point we'll discuss again. Just had it confirmed, Theo, that all 10 of these MPs voted against the Letwin amendment, so that kind of gives you a clue.
Yes, that's what I was saying. That's what I was saying. So they're showing loyalty. Pat on the back, chaps. Well done. You voted against Letwin. That was what we wanted. For now, we need you on side. We need to defeat this opposition change on. We need to defeat this opposition change. Opposition move to try and change the date. Back in the party. You can go back to your associations. You can have a cup of tea with your association chairman.
And everything's fine.
And everything's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Lovely. Theo, thank you. And there was one other Conservative who also had lost the whip as part of the 21 but voted against the Letwin amendment, and that was Rory Stewart. But he, of course, has now left the party completely and is running against the Conservatives as an independent candidate for London Mayor. And I'm asked here whether maybe what we ought to do is to have a referendum about whether we should have an election. If we don't like the result, we can always ask to do it again. Let's go to the news. It's now 6:30. Holly Jones. A general election may well be coming. We'll know within the next hour and a half or so. And MPs are voting tonight on whether the general election should be on the 12th of December, on the 9th of December. There is also, for accuracy, an SNP amendment suggesting that it's on the 7th of May 2020, but I think we can discount that one. That one's not going to get very far. Is there a majority for a general election? Extraordinary that Boris Johnson, in the last few minutes, has announced that the whip has been restored to 10 of the 21 rebels who were kicked out, who of course supported the Benn Act, trying to take a so-called no deal off the table. Let's go to the Central Lobby in Westminster and speak to LBC senior reporter Matthew Thompson. Matthew, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
Is it a happy atmosphere down there?
I don't think happy is the word I would use to describe it. Strained, Nigel, perhaps strained and exhausted. Lots of people running on fumes, it has to be said around here. I think the first thing to be said is that I think there has been possibly a little bit of confusion in the reporting around the amendments selected. I understand now that there hasn't been an amendment for the 7th of May.
Oh,
selected.
I was told
so
that.
In fact,
Right,
is
I stand
indeed.
corrected.
So was I. But I think now what's happened is there's a bit of misreporting, and the third amendment selected is actually a procedural one that depends on the 9th of December amendment being selected. So the real question in everyone's minds here, Nigel, is: are we having an election, first of all? Are we having an election on the 9th of December?
And if so,
are we
when?
having an election on the 12th of December?
Right, so are we having an election, Matthew? That's the big question.
Well,
is there a majority?
That is the big question. And the answer that I would be prepared to put my neck on the chopping block, Nigel, having spoken to lots of MPs here throughout the day, is that yes, we are having an election. Why do I say that? Well, look, I've spoken to MPs on the Conservative side, on the government side, and I think that they would be prepared to concede the 9th of December if that amendment passes. They weren't prepared to, for example, concede votes at 16 or votes extended the franchise to EU citizens because they thought that was just impractical and also beyond the scope of the legislation. But those amendments weren't selected. They would have pulled the bill had that happened. But I think they would be prepared to wear a 9th of December election. And then I've also spoken to MPs on the other side of the House, opposition MPs, and I've said to them, well, look, are you prepared, if your amendment doesn't pass, are you prepared to wear an election on the government's timetable, i.e. on the 12th of December? And a number of both Labour and Liberal Democrat MPs have indicated to me that they would be. So it really seems to me, Nigel, that the question is not are we having an election at this stage, it's when will that election be? Sorry, go ahead.
And Matthew, is there any thought or gossip that the House of Lords tomorrow could try and mess this up?
Well, there is, in fact, Nigel. So I got wind of this gossip a while ago, and I consulted some of my legislative experts in the House of Lords, who tell me that essentially, when amendments are ruled out of scope in the Commons, there isn't an authority who has the power to do that in the Lords. So what there is something called the legislative office, and they can recommend to Lords that their proposed amendments are out of scope. Now, generally speaking, the Lords obey that convention. They obey the legislative office, but they could still table the amendment. The House of Lords, ultimately, and the Lord itself who's moving the amendment, has the final say over it. So what would happen is, if it was a controversial amendment, the legislative office would decide that it potentially breached, that it was potentially out of scope. They would advise the Lord not to move it, and generally speaking, Lords don't follow that advice and don't move it. And I would say this simply, Nigel. It might be seen as inadvisable for an unelected House to do things that might alter the franchise of the elected House. So I would have thought that there would be it would be a risky strategy for the Lords to try and fiddle with the franchise.
I agree.
But on a strictly procedural point, it is possible.
Okay. Matthew, thank you very much. And what time are you expecting these results?
We're expecting a vote, I would have thought, sometime shortly after 7 o'clock on the various amendments. So sometime, I was told, between 7:15 and 7:45, we're expecting a series of votes on the amendments. So that should decide whether or not we get this election date. There is one other thing that I possibly should add that I've heard, Nigel, which is that it is also possible at the final stage of this bill, when it comes back before the House, that amendments can still be tabled. So it's not completely inconceivable that MPs are burrowed away at the moment trying to find wordings of amendments that are within scope. And the other thing to note in that regard, Nigel, is that later on it will be John Bercow in the chair, not the
I picked that up. Matthew, thank you very much indeed. Stay close. That was Matthew Thompson in the lobby. And he says there is going to be a general election. It just depends whether it's going to be the 9th or whether it's going to be the 12th. And yes, there will not be a vote on whether 16 or 17-year-olds should get the vote. Russell on Facebook says he thinks the voting age should be raised to 25. I tell you what, Russell, we'll debate that another time. Craig is a new caller from Uppingham in Rutland. Craig, good evening to you.
Yeah, hello, Nigel. How are you going?
We're doing all right. So, Craig, are you happy there appears to be some break of the deadlock in Parliament just a few minutes away?
Well, I think it's good that they're actually making some progress. Nigel, my point is that I'm not been long term in the UK. I'm a UK citizen and been over here since December. And I can honestly say, since I've got here, I've had enough of Brexit already. So much so I've registered to vote, and I know where I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote to leave.
Okay. Yeah.
But my biggest thing with this whole electoral thing is that why is voting optional? The whole legitimacy of the voting.
Yeah, I mean, you're
diluted, if you know what I mean.
You come from Australia, I'm presuming, Craig.
Absolutely, yep.
Where voting is compulsory.
Yes, absolutely. If you're 18, you've got to vote.
And if you don't vote, there's a small fine placed on you.
That's correct, yeah. And it escalates. If you stop voting, you get bigger and bigger fines.
I would argue back against you, Craig, that in a democracy we should be free to exercise our vote, but equally free not to exercise our vote. And I think it's more democratic to give people the choice.
Well, I think that's why it's a fairly nominal fine. You're talking probably the equivalent to about £20, so it's not a big fine. The other thing is also we hold our elections on a Saturday, so you have the opportunity to go to a polling station.
Well, so I mean, most of Europe votes on a Sunday, of course, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
We've done Thursdays by tradition. If we held elections on a Sunday, well, there'd certainly be some church objections to that. I'm sure of that. Although I have to say the church's voice is not the power in Milan that it once was. But would there be a bigger turnout if it was a Sunday election? Do you think?
I think it'd be massively bigger because people don't have to have time off to get to work, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But I think too it also changes the legitimacy of it because in Australia, when you vote for them, you get if 51% of the country votes for a particular decision, then you know what you've got. There's no arguments of, it was only, so many percentage of the population actually turned out to vote.
That I do understand, Craig. That I do get. But as I say, I'm going to stick very firmly to my line that in a free society and democracy, you should be free to exercise your vote or not. That's my view. Craig, great call. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Mohammed, who's a new caller from Birmingham. Good evening to you, Mohammed.
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well. Welcome. So, are you?
You're looking good, Nigel.
Well, I'm doing my best. Are you pleased, Mohammed, that we could be very close to the news that a general election is coming?
Well, I think this is the best thing to do right now. So it gives you a clear view of where the country stands. And then just get Brexit done. I agree with you. Just get it done. The country voted, so let's just do it and get over it.
Okay.
That's my view. That's my.
No, I mean, listen. I think a lot of people do feel like that. Absolutely, and I mean, we don't want it to go on forever. But Mohammed, if I said to you that the Boris Johnson version of getting Brexit done means we go in straight into another phase of negotiations, would that be a surprise to you?
The negotiation has to be done anyway. So like what you say, clean Brexit. So you just leave, and you need to negotiate anyway. But, the question is, what's going to happen with all the companies that trade? UK companies that trade with European companies. If you all of a sudden leave, I mean, there needs to be a regulation in place on it.
Well, I think, look, I think the honest truth is that a huge amount of work has been done on this already, and we certainly have, the bosses of the ports of Calais saying there'll be no extra delays. There's one more piece of paperwork to fill in, although much of that can be done online these days. And there could be tariff, Mohammed. Yes, that's right. There could be, and that would adversely affect some, but for others, of course, who import from the rest of the world, the chance of tariffs being reduced could be very good for their business. So, there are swings and roundabouts on this, but anyway, you just want to get it done. I completely understand that sentiment. I thank you for the call. A lot of people just want to get Brexit done. It's why, from Boris Johnson's perspective, it is such a good phrase if it stands up to scrutiny. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:45, and time for the news headlines with Holly Jones. If a general election gets confirmed in about an hour's time, will it lead to a sort of starburst of optimism in the country? Will you all be overjoyed? Looking at some of these messages, I'm not so sure. Mike in Shenfield says, forget arguing about the date. I wouldn't mind betting it'll be the lowest turnout of recent times. We're sick of them all. Adrian from Cornwall says, no. What we need is a referendum on a referendum on a referendum about a general election. And lots of you putting in comments saying how sick to death you are of constant wrecking amendments in the House of Commons. I think whichever way this election plays out tonight, and perhaps over the course of the next 5 or 6 weeks, I think there is definitely within the country a pretty sour feeling towards politics and politicians, and I hope the debate and a chance to change things can actually start to make us believe in the system again, because confidence at the moment, I think, is very low. Let's go to Heather in Dorchester. Heather, what would you like to see?
Oh, hi, Nigel.
Hello.
Thanks for taking my call. Just two quick things. One, I think if we vote on this time, I didn't want to. They should have sorted it out for us, because that's what they're there for, to represent us. However, I think we've seen what they've said in House of Parliament. We've seen what they say on interviews on TV. So at least when we vote, we do have our eyes open about who we're voting for, and if they're the person that we want to represent us. And on the voting, it's too dark, it's wet, disabled people won't be able to vote, these are all elderly. Well, as far as I was aware, the opening hours for voting is very early in the morning.
It's
plenty of hours of daylight.
It's 7 till 10, Heather. You can also get a proxy vote, so somebody else can go and vote for you. You can also get a postal vote, although I have reservations about the way that's abused. So,
I have that because I'm disabled.
Okay. Well, Heather, I will tell you this. The last time an election happened, it was the 6th of December, 1923, all right? And there was a general election. And in those days, hardly anybody had a car. All right, there was no central heating. Many parts of the country had insufficient street lighting, and still they had a huge turnout for the election. So if people want to vote, they will vote, won't they?
I think they will, and I think the people that are using these silly excuses are just as somebody said, they're making an excuse because they don't have a proper point to put across.
Well, that's probably right. And Heather, I mean, postal votes were designed for people like you. If you're disabled, they were designed for the elderly. They were designed for people working overseas. What they weren't designed, and normally postal votes used to be about 2 to 3% of the overall turnout. And what's happened in the last couple of decades is people have been allowed to apply for postal votes on demand, and in the early days of it, without any proper proof of identity. And it's shown itself to be very, very open to manipulation, intimidation, and abuse. And so I think, for me, although my political career, I suppose, has been defined by wanting to get Brexit, but for me, the next most important thing is massive change and political reform in our country. I think we have to re-establish some trust.
I totally agree.
In the whole thing. And I think a lot of people do feel that way, you know. Heather, thank you very much indeed for your call. We're off to Stourbridge in the West Midlands to speak to Robert, who's a new caller to the show. Good evening, Robert.
Hiya, Nigel. You okay?
We're okay, yeah. So, what are you hoping for, Robert?
We don't need a general election. Right. I've only ever voted twice before, and I voted to leave the European Union. Yes. And I voted Brexit in the end, for the European elections.
Okay.
Right. So the problem is the Remainers. They just moan, and they get their own way time after time after time. And what needs to happen is before any kind of election, we need a referendum in this country on a deal or no deal on that mandate, and then give that to Labour, to Conservative, and then. I don't even know what the Liberals are, but just give that to the Conservatives and to Labour and say, have a general election with that mandate. Because if we have a general election now, it's going to solve nothing. We're just going to go round and round in circles and remain in the EU.
It might, Robert, a general election might give us clarity.
How will it? Because, we might
get
Remain.
We could, in theory, go
for leave. What's the Brexit Party going to do? What's Conservative?
I know there are lots of questions, but right at the moment we have a zombie parliament where the government gets voted down again and again.
Yeah, but if we have a referendum first, we get rid of that zombie parliament and we get a leave parliament.
Okay, do you want a referendum on how we leave? Look, Robert, I don't want a second referendum.
No, not on how we leave. Not on how we leave. I'm saying have a referendum.
No, I get that. Whether we leave on the EU treaty proposal,
but do you not think there's a risk that we're going to end up remaining in the EU regardless of what we voted? Because Parliament and politicians are useless and not listening to the people, and this is what gets my goat.
Robert, I understand the criticism. You're frustrated anger. I've got
Margot James, my representative for Parliament.
She's in the news tonight, Robert. So she has been readmitted as a Conservative member of Parliament. She's got the whip back, so she may well be standing in your constituency.
Wow.
How would you feel about that?
Can I ask you, Nigel? I'm from Stourbridge. I don't know if you know the constituency, but is there going to be a Brexit candidate?
I will answer all of those questions in the next few days, Robert. I'm not going to make any commitments on air right now.
I can't vote, because I'm not voting Conservative, I'm not voting Labour, I'm not voting Liberal. So, that's a vote for me,
Robert.
And like I said, I've only ever voted twice before.
Yeah,
that was for Brexit Party.
This issue matters to you.
The EU.
Yeah, this issue matters to you, Robert. Thank you for your call, and Robert, they're very, very frustrated about things. He is not on his own. Neil is a new caller from Wigan. Good evening to you, Neil.
Hello, Nigel. It's a privilege to speak to you tonight.
Good to speak to you.
I'm very stuck. I feel as though I need more time for a general election.
More time?
I just feel as though there's no party I can vote for because there's no party done what the greatest majority of this country want, and that's out of the European Union.
Yeah,
being from Wigan, I'm in a strong Labour constituency, and Leave is a neighbouring constituency to me. All voted to Leave,
yes.
and the Labour Party is sticking in Parliament saying, they want to remain. It's a disgrace.
Well, Lisa Nandy, who is the Wigan MP for Labour, she did actually vote for Boris Johnson's deal/treaty, didn't she?
She did, but I heard her in Parliament begging Jeremy Corbyn not to take the whip away from her. Do you remember listening to that?
Yeah, I mean, Do you think Lisa Nandy did that sincerely? Or do you think she did
Oh,
it
yeah,
to try
she doesn't want to lose the whip. But if he'd have said, yeah, we'll take the whip away from you, then she'd have been whipped into saying, oh, we're not bothered about your constituents. No, we want to, we'll keep you in because our leader wants you to keep us in. So, no, I don't like it. I don't buy Labour. I don't buy the Conservatives.
The problem here, Neil, is that the Labour Party in 2017 in the election stood saying they would respect the result of the referendum, and now they want to, and now they want a second referendum, and that
They've
I think
lied. They've lied.
Well, that's a very strong
That's a
word.
lie.
It's a strong word.
Well, it's the truth, is it?
How angry do you
That's
feel
the
about?
truth.
How angry, Neil, do you feel about?
I'm
all
very
of this?
angry. I want us to leave the European Union. No deal. I want us to go straight away. We should have gone with the first 6 months. The Tory party under Theresa May should have gone to Brussels, said, if you want to trade deal with us, we're in London, bye-bye.
Neil,
it's as simple as that. No qualms about it.
No, Neil, you're not. Honestly, a lot of people feel that way and they're frustrated. But I think, Neil, I'm going to have to love you and leave you because I'm out of time. We'll find out within the next hour whether we're going to have a general election. I think we probably are. I'll be back tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Tonight, later on at 10, it's Tom Swarbrick. But right now, for the big vote, it's Ian Dale.
How many times have you said that before, Nigel?
I know, but this one really is, isn't it?
It is, but of course the House of Lords could still scupper this.
I tell you what, if they do, we'll have a referendum on the future of the House of Lords. How about that?
A referendum, really? I don't think so.
Maybe not.
Anyway, thank you very much indeed. That's Nigel Farage, ladies and gentlemen, for the next 3 hours. It's Groundhog Day again. We could be getting an election. I think this is now, is it the 4th or the 5th time that I've said this? But this time it does look as if we will be, because this morning Jeremy Corbyn announced he would back the government's early election bill. The Liberal Democrats and Labour and the SNP have all said that they would too. The bill passed its second reading about, an hour and a half ago on the nod